Hello, Blake Rudis here, and today we're going to do something really fun. We're going to take a boring photograph that was taken at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and make it appear like it was taken in the evening with a beautiful glowing pink sunset. So let's go ahead and get started on this photograph. We need to kind of craft this image out. If you've downloaded this and maybe you put it on your desktop, wherever you have it, just go ahead and open it in your On1 Photo RAW. So I'm in Browse here and I'm going to go into Develop. Now, before I begin working on this image, I want to talk about some things with this photograph. So in looking at it, it's a little dark, and that happens when I'm working with ND filters. I get that. That's fine. We can work that out later. I'm not too concerned with that. But what I am concerned with is what I wanted this image to look like. Okay, so I'm out there. This is in Hawaii. I'm on the North Shore. It's absolutely gorgeous. I'm by myself on this beautiful beach. Nobody else was there. And it's about, I would say, 4:30 in the afternoon. So it's still rather daylight, okay? And I don't really have a sunset, but what I really wanted was a sunset on this beach. However, I had to go somewhere else, so I couldn't stay there for very long. But I knew that if I took my 10-stop ND filter out, even in broad daylight, I could really slow the shutter speed down of this image. So if you look at our info here, this is at f4 with an ISO of 200 at about just under a second. In my EXIF data, I see 0.6 seconds. So when you're shooting water like this, you don't have to make it flow into these marshmallowy looking streams, okay? The trick to getting a shot like this is not actually waiting for the water to come up towards you, but waiting for the water to go away from you. So once the water has reached its peak, you're going to go ahead and hit your shutter, and at that half-second point, it's just going to slowly start washing towards the ocean. But because it's moving so fast, going downhill on that sand, it looks a lot faster than it actually is. So it looks like we're capturing a lot more time than we actually are. So that's a good trick. If you're out shooting water, make sure you wait until it's going back into the ocean. Okay, so what I want this to look like is I want it to look like an evening photograph, not an afternoon, not 4:30 in the afternoon photo. So in order to do that, we're going to need to exaggerate some things. So if you're familiar with the way I have shown you how to do things in the past, I talk about working on tone, color, and then effects. So what we're going to do here is we're going to get our image technically perfect when it comes to tone, technically perfect when it comes to color, and then we're going to work into the artistic effects. Now for this, are we going to do anything outrageously artistic? No, not necessarily. We're just going to make it look like an evening sunset photograph. So the first thing we need to do is we need to make sure that our image is straight. So go into the crop tool and go to the level, and I'm just going to click and drag this across the back horizon. It looks like it's actually pretty good, but I'm just going to make sure. And it looks like we need just a little bit of straightness there, nothing too crazy. Now we need to get our image technically tonal perfect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at my histogram. And from the histogram, I'm going to say, okay, what do I need to do to this photograph? Well, I already talked to you and told you that it's a little dark. So let's first start with the exposure. Let's just move this exposure up until we're about almost at a whole stop brighter. So you can see we just forced the histogram from about the halfway point closer to the whites. And don't worry about blowing anything out at this point because we can modify that with our whites and our highlights, okay? So now with the whites, I'm actually going to bring those up a little bit because I like the peaks that are happening on the tops of the waves, okay? So what I like about this shutter speed is we get the motion, but we also get kind of the turmoil in the water. It's beautiful, absolutely beautiful. I really wish I lived near more water. I'm jealous of the On1 folks for living so close to the beach. All right, so now we're going to go to our highlights and just drop those highlights. So if you notice what I did there is I brought those whites up to the point that they were really bright, but then came in here at the highlights and just brought them down a slight bit. So our highlights are looking like, you know, the negative 45 to 55 range, and our whites anywhere from 19 to 25, somewhere in that range. Whatever you're comfortable with works just fine. Doesn't have to be nitpicky perfect, okay? So now let's look at our blacks and our shadows. Now, if we look at our histogram, we can see exactly where our blacks are. They're right about here. But if we want to lift those a little bit and pull some of the darkness away from there, we're just going to bring this up a little bit. Lift our blacks up a little bit. You see those black areas now get a little bit more light and airy. So we're reducing the contrast in those black areas just a little bit. And then we can come in here to our shadows and see if we want to make them darker or lighter. Well, with this image, I don't like how the high contrast looks of this darkness because it's a light, kind of airy feeling image. So I'm going to go ahead and just take those shadows up to about the 24, 25 mark. Somewhere in there works. And now you'll notice this whole time I haven't touched contrast yet. You might be wondering why I didn't do that. Well, what happens when you increase your highlights and your shadows and your whites and your blacks and you're working with all this exposure stuff, you're actually losing contrast in the process because you're lifting those shadows and you're doing things with your highlights. So now we can come into our contrast and we can just bump this up and slowly move it over. What I like to do is actually bring it up as high as it can go and then slowly taper it down to a point that my eye actually likes. Then I'll get it back down to around 0 and then bring it back up to a point where my eye likes, and I like it at around this 15, 14 range. When it comes to numbers here, we aren't too concerned. We just want to get a nice, technically tonal perfect image. So now we look at our photo. Again, we straightened it out and we got our image looking really nice. What I like about this now, as opposed to before, is our white peaks on our water back here actually look a lot better. And that's really important when you're working with water, because we want the viewer to gravitate their eye towards areas of highlight so we can actually control exactly what they see in our photograph. Okay, so tone and color. We're looking good on the tone here. Now let's go ahead and look at our temperature of our image. I want to make this a little bit more in the bluer range. So what I'm going to do is this trick that I showed recently. I'm going to bring this vibrance all the way up to see what this image looks like with a lot of color in it. And it's going to show me that we have a lot of really vibrant oranges kind of going on in the whole image that are deterring us from getting a nice blue look. Now that blue is going to help us be the baseline for the rest of our processing, where we're going to get all of our magentas from that you saw in the after image. So I'm going to go ahead and drop this down a little bit and get that to about right there. So what I'm doing here is I'm bringing up that vibrance all the way so I can see what color is my culprit color that's holding back the image. Now when I bring this back down to 0, that's going to help us get that tint in the temperature just right, so we get our image a little bit more on the blue side. We can maybe even make it a little bit, add a little bit of green there too. And that, now we have technically, I guess you would say, a really good white balance for our photograph. That trick of slamming up your vibrance to see what the culprit color is and then just reducing whatever its complement is a great way to get a really pinpoint accurate white balance for our photograph. So anywhere between -10 and 15, 16 range, that'll work. Again, we aren't being too picky with our actual numbers here. We just want to look at the actual look of our image. So now we're going to go to show more here, and we're going to add a color adjustment. Now, I did tone. Now I'm working on color. And here's where you get to be really intricate with all of your colors. So we can see here, do we have any red in our image? I'm clicked on red right here. I'm going to go ahead and move that up. And we do have a little bit of red here, but not a whole lot. It looks like our reds are actually going to be more in the orange areas there. So let me go ahead and go into the oranges. Bump up the saturation. Boom. Look at how bright those get now. Ah, I love that. I love it. Okay. But I don't like how red they are. So I'm going to bring this slider over to change the hue over to about the 11 to 13 range. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the range of the color orange, and I'm going to bring it down and bring it up, because that tells me how much orange of the orange is being selected. Well, let's bring that all the way up to 100. So now let's take a look at our saturation, because it doesn't look very good. So let's bring this back down and bring it down to where we still have some color, but it's not as vibrant and pungent as it was. And now we can look at the lightness or darkness of that color orange. And I love what happens when we start to craft and hone the orange color in this image by making it a little bit brighter. So anywhere between 9 and 12. So what I'm doing when I modify these colors is I first come in, I slam the saturation all the way up to see where that color exists. Then I come into the hue, I modify the hue to get it right about where I want it, where I like it. And then I look at the brightness and the darkness of that color. I think it's good there. And then I come back in and address that saturation to get it more realistic to where I want. Now I'm going to go over to the color green, do the exact same thing. Slam up that saturation to see where it is, then start modifying the hue of the color green. You can see we got a lot of green back here. I really want to bring out those palm trees. Bring that up there. And then we'll go into our brightness and bring it up and down. And I like what happens here when we take the green and we make it really dark. We had a lot of darkness to that color green. Now I'm going to head over to my cyans or my aquas, and we're going to go ahead and slam up that saturation. See exactly where that color is. Now we're going to change the hue of that a little bit. Notice how when we change the hue of the cyan, we're starting to get some pinkish and some purplish happening up there. That's a good thing. That's the route that we want to go with this. So we're using that blue up there as the baseline to get that. So now let's go ahead and look at the brightness. I'm going to make those darker A lot darker in the cyans. Watch what happens when I bring up the cyans back here. We get some banding back here. You see that? So let's go ahead and bring that brightness down. And then we'll come into our saturation and see where our saturation looks. I think for this, I might go on the negative saturation side of this and bring down some of those cyans, because now I'm going to go into the blues and see what the blues hold for me. Again, slam up that saturation and go into the hue. All right, we're getting to a hue that we like here. Nice purple hue for that sky to make it look more like it's taken in the evening. Yes, we're cheating here, and that's okay. Now we'll bring the saturation down a little bit. Perfect, perfect, perfect. So now let's look at our before and after real quick before we start moving on here. Before, it's lopsided and very dark, and now it's straight and has a lot of color. Now we're using that color as a base, okay? Because now what we're gonna do is we're gonna add some local adjustments that are gonna give us a nice color for the sky and a nice color for the foreground. So I'm gonna go ahead and go up to the local adjustments here, and there's a tool over here. It's a masking tool. So I'm gonna click on this masking tool, which is the adjustable gradient. Click on that, and when we have that click, just click right here on the horizon. So if we look at this, if we press the O key will tell us where our mask is. So if we look at this, we can modify our mask to get it just right to where we want. I want a nice feather between what happens in my foreground and my sky. So right now, these adjustments are only affecting my sky and not my foreground. And we can see that because if we press the O key, it'll give us a visual. If you see mine is red there and you wonder why mine looks red, if you right click on this mask, you can say view mode, and you can either change it to grayscale where it shows white on black, or it shows the red overlay. For this, I'm going to use the red overlay. Now I get to structure and fine tune what I want my sky to look like. And this is where we start to get into the artistry. So we got the tone, we got the color. Now we're using color in an artistic way to start structuring and fashioning this image. So now with that sky, I want to make it look more warm. So how am I going to do that? Well, if I add some yellow here, that'll definitely make it warmer. I'm going to bring that yellow up to about here. And then I'm going to look at my tint and bring my tint up pretty high. I'm talking like plus 200 high. And then we'll look at the overall saturation of that sky. Maybe bring in some more saturation there. And maybe some more vibrance too. Now, if you look at this and you're thinking, what are you thinking, Blake? What on God's green earth are you doing to those trees up there? Well, this is what we're going to do. We're going to come up to this gear icon, and we're going to change some things around so that this is more effective on our image. I'm going to come here first of all, and I'm going to change this blending mode to color. And why color? Well, what color does is color takes the colors of the temperature that we have here and it applies them to our image, but it allows all the luminance values underneath to show through the color. So we're basically not modifying the tones in our image when we do this, really just the color. And now I'm going to come here to where it says shadows, and I can reduce the effect of this color on these shadow areas. If we look over there into those trees, notice when I bring this up, it starts to protect those trees from getting too pink. Now the thing is, we want that pink light to cast its light onto our trees, but we don't want it to look like pink trees. So we can protect some of those shadowy areas from getting that pink color on them by moving that up. So now what we're gonna do? We're gonna do a very similar thing, but we're gonna do it for the foreground. So if you notice here, we have this set to color and we're protecting our shadows from having that happen. But we need the light to match. We need the light to match in the foreground as we need it to match in the background, because we can't just add that mask there and expect this to look great, right? Because if we just add that mask there, look at the sky. The sky looks like a vibrant purpley color, but then our foreground, it's got nothing. Well, what we need to do is make a new local adjustment. And again, we're gonna take this little guy right here, this little masking bug, and we're gonna put it right here. Now, if we look at our mask by pressing O, you'll notice that it's not gonna affect our foreground. It's only affecting our sky. So if you click on the mask, you can say invert, bam, look at that. So now any of our adjustments happening here will affect our foreground and not affect our background. Okay, so we're basically doing two local adjustments here to start crafting the glowing look and the glowing color of our image. And with this one, I'm gonna go ahead and just make it the exact same settings that we had down here. So I'm gonna reference what we have down here. This is 55, 200, 12, and 19. So I'm gonna remember that. I'm gonna go 55, 200, 12, and 19. Bam. Okay, we're done. I'm just kidding. That's horrible. So first of all, when we look at this, it's just too much. We're over exaggerating the color. We're not making it look realistic. So what we need to do to fix that, again, because we're only affecting our foreground now, if you press the O key here, you can see we're only affecting that foreground. I need to make some modifications to this. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at my blend mode and see if I want to change that. I don't necessarily want to change that because if I change the blend mode, it doesn't apply a very nice amount of color to the image. But what I can do is I can say, well, where exactly do I want that color? And I really want it on the peaks of the highlights of the water. So if I go to apply to, I can say only apply this local adjustment that you're now applying globally. Only apply that to my highlights. And it's not going to look good. So what we're going to need to do is take our range and increase that range. And as we increase that range, it's making a bigger selection of what we're calling a highlight. Right now, we're just calling this little teeny tiny little piece right here a highlight. We increase this range, we're saying, no, these are all highlights now. Those are highlights, okay? And we can even come in here and maybe make some more protections. We can come in here and start protecting maybe the mid-tone areas, which would be, it's labeled skin, but this is also in the landscape world, your mid-tone areas. So we can bring that up to start protecting some of those mid-tone areas. And we might even be able to bring up those highlights to start rounding that out a little bit. Notice how now we're starting to get a more realistic color that is happening on our foreground area here. If we look at the before, we didn't have any of that color there now. We're just getting a very clean, nice purple color cast that matches the purple or magenta of our background of our image, okay? And we'll drop this at the opacity down just a little bit more here. So if we look at this, we also have tonal abilities now too. We can look at the tones of this highlight area because now this is only affecting our highlights, right? So if we come in here and we bring down our contrast a little bit, maybe even bring down the highlight areas a little bit, we're starting to now, because we have this already set up to only affect our highlights, we may as well do something to these waves to make them come out a little bit more. And then we can maybe come into our shadows and boost that up to brighten up the whole area. And we also have now the ability to come into the details of those wave areas and really make them look a little bit more like they're in a little bit more turmoil by giving them a little bit more detail. So we're looking really good here. We've got a very nice tone and color perfected image, but now what we need to do is first look at our before and after to see just how good of a job we're doing, and now we need to move over to effects because here's where things are all going to start coming about. We got the tone right, we got the color right, now we're over in effects. We need to go to the overall settings, not the local adjustments, but the overall settings, and now we can start crafting and putting some nice color casts on our image to make it even look more like an evening photo as opposed to the daytime photo that we took. So I'm going to add a photo filter. I usually don't add photo filters, but this one looks really good on here. And with this photo filter, I'm going to look at what I want it to do. And I don't want it to apply itself like this, like a blanket wash. Again, I use the blend mode a lot that's called color. And why? Because it protects my underlying tones and only applies the color to the image. Okay, so all those underlying tones get to show through that beautiful color that we're adding to our photo. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jack up this saturation. And again, why do I do that? Well, Blake, we jack up the saturation because when we lift that saturation so high up, it allows us to see exactly what color we want to place on our photo. So I'm going to move this down until I start to get a nice orange glow that I like. And that looks like right about here. Look at how that nice orange glow is adding to the purple that we already added to make a very nice, beautiful magenta. So now what I can do is drop this amount down. Okay, so we really slammed up that amount, and now we're going to drop it down to get it a little bit more at bay. Okay, so it's not so vibrant and stark on our image. And we might even be able to come in here to the saturation and give our image a little bit of saturation and that orangish glow too. That looks pretty good right about there. If we look at the before the photo filter, after the photo filter, notice how we're starting to get that evening glow to come about in our image. Now let's add another photo filter. And with that photo filter, we're just going to click right here. And with this photo filter, I want this one to only affect the sky. Because if we look at this, I need the sky to be a little bit more robust so that there's a little bit more there for the viewer to look at. So this photo filter, we're going to do the same technique we did in the last with the local adjustments. We're going to click on the mask, click on this masking bug, and we've got it so it's right about here. Looks like I'm in my local adjustments. I clicked on the wrong one. Happens to me all the time. So here you see the word local. Yeah, Blake, you should have clicked here where it says mask. There you go. All right, clicking here to the mask. It's always good to laugh at yourself when you edit. If you're not laughing at yourself when you edit, you're not doing something correct, okay? So that's the best advice I can give you throughout this whole tutorial. So again, we're going to get the same kind of glowing effect. We want to get a nice, beautiful glow that's going to match our sky, that's going to bring the whole image together. And if we press the O key, we only want this to affect our sky. So right now, it's actually affecting our foreground and not our sky. So I need to invert that, okay? So now it's affecting our sky. I noticed that we had some more blue down there than we needed. So let's go ahead and jack that amount up, all the way up, and then move this down to see what color it is that we want to add to our image. I'm going to go really close. Ooh, that is looking, oh, I like that. I like that a lot. and get excited while you edit. If you don't get excited while you edit, you're definitely not doing something right. So laugh at yourself and have fun. So bring this down to about 33. That looks good. And I think my saturation is okay. Let's go ahead and look at our blending options. I think I might want to leave that with, let's see what color looks like. Let's leave that at normal, but now we'll go into some of our protections here. So I see that there's some highlights in those clouds, so let's bring that up to get some of those highlights back. That looks good. And let's bring this shadows up. Okay, that looks about good. Bring the highlights down a little bit, and then look at the skin, protecting some of those shadow areas. Let me turn this off and turn it back on again. You know what, let's try this. Let's go to apply to and say highlights. Perfect. So now we get like this nice blending that's happening between the blue in the sky and the magenta. You see how that happens now? Because if we look at what our highlights are really this area back here that as we make these edits is starting to get a little bit blown out. All right, so I want to add some color to that area, and I'll even increase that range a little bit so we can see what our highlight areas are. And that looks good right there, okay? So if we have that back to all, and then we set it to highlights, I like how it's applying itself to the highlights. That looks really good. So now when we look at this, let's go ahead and get a different tool so we don't have that masking bug in our face. Now we've got a really good crafted, artistically colorful photo, but we can still take this further. So this is kind of like the turning point. And from here, I'm going to venture off into one direction. And I'm asking you, if you want to go ahead and follow me, by all means do so. But this is an opportunity where you get to venture off into what you would do with this photograph. It's kind of like a choose your own adventure book. Like if you want this to happen, read page 52. If not, stay right along with me on page 32, okay? So we're going to go to add filter. And one of the things that I really like is the split tone. Here we go. Boom, split tone. Beautiful. Beautiful split tone. And I'm going to change that split tone to the Oats split tone. Oh my gosh. I always like the way this one looks on my image when I add it. So in looking at this, I don't think I really need to do much of anything to it. I like what's happening with all of the image. I might come in here and drop the opacity just a little bit. That looks about good right there, but you can even leave it at 100 if you want. Just by itself, I like the way Oats makes my image look cool. See how we changed the whole feeling of the photo. The cool one makes it cooler, a little bit more dismal. The Oats makes it warm, makes it lively, and makes us actually maybe want to stick our feet in the sand where the water is washing away. Instead of the cool, I'm like, that's cold water. We're in San Francisco. Now we're in Hawaii. So that looks good. And now one more thing that I'm going to add here to kind of wrap this whole thing up as a vignette, to really narrow my viewer's vision into the center of my photograph. So I'm going to go to add filter, and I'm going to click on vignette. And one of my favorite ones here is either strong or big softy. And I like the way the big softy adds some really nice contrast around those edges and really starts to make it look like, especially over there in that left-hand corner, it really makes it look like the sun is setting over there. So we have a sun setting over here. We've got these beautiful palm trees over here. We've got this nice glowing color in between. But by itself, it's a little too powerful. So I can open up my settings here, and I can go ahead and click on my highlights here and drag that over so that some of those highlight areas start to get protected. You can bring it all the way up or just a little shy of all the way up. We don't want it to protect our shadow areas because then it starts to look like tone compression. We don't really want it to affect maybe a little bit in the midtones there. We can protect a little bit of those midtones. Just get a nice gradual increase there. And then look at the overall opacity of it. Because the thing about a vignette is if the viewer can tell that you used a vignette, you probably used too much. But now they can barely tell. So let's look at our before and after. Here's our before. Here's our after. And look at that. It looks like, this looks like an afternoon photograph, and this looks like I took it right as the sun was going down towards 7 or 8 o'clock at night, as opposed to 4 o'clock in the afternoon with an ND filter. Now the trick here is that I took this photograph in broad daylight with an ND filter, a 10-stop ND filter, to really reduce the shutter speed of my image. Otherwise, this probably would have been, I don't know, let's just throw a number out there, 1/2000th of a second, and the water would have looked like splashes instead of nice streaming water. So keep that in mind, and then just think about it. One of the things that I don't like is when someone says, I don't like to shoot at 2 o'clock in the afternoon because the light's horrible. You're right. But if you throw a 10-stop ND filter on there, you can get some really cool looking images with those moving clouds. It doesn't matter where you are. Even if you're in the city, you can slow down the motion of people walking. You can slow down the motion of the cars moving. And that 2 o'clock in the afternoon, when you said it wasn't a good time to shoot, now becomes an artistically beautiful time to shoot because you're thinking ahead. It's called pre-visualization. Before I even took this shot, I knew that I could do something with it afterwards, and you just have to craft it. You have to think about what it is that you want to do and fine tune, hone it, and craft it. So again, we did tone, color, artistic effects. We got our tones just right over here in the develop module. And if you say, does it really make a difference that we added that color? Yes, it does. Look at what happens when we don't get our colors technically perfect. It doesn't look very good here. Now, when I'm looking at this, I can look at my greens now and say, that might be a little bit too high on the green saturation there. You might want to pull that down, Blake. And let's look at our yellows, maybe a little bit less on the yellows there. But we go back through, we look. Tone looks great. Color looks great. If we turn that eyeball off, you can see what happens when we turn that eyeball off. Now let's go to our local adjustments. What happens when we do this? Turn this off and turn this off. Look at that. We can't just add the artistic effects, okay? We have to fine tune, we have to craft, and we have to hone our image. That's the only way to get a beautiful looking photograph like this. So I just want to thank you very much for taking the time to watch this. Again, my name is Blake Rudis, and I hope you picked up a couple things along the way.